BBOR Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello, everybody. Today is Monday, another Zodiac Monday. Welcome to the show. How's everybody doing? I hope everyone had a good weekend. In this episode, I will be responding to Forrest Haggerty's Zodiac Killer video series, conducting a psychological assessment of the Zodiac Killer, and entering into the Zodiac Vortex. My name is Ned DeHaan, and I am your host, and I would like to begin by sharing a new image that was created for Jason Hassett's channel. Jason Hassett made a Zodiac Killer documentary last year, and it's done rather well online. It mostly focused on the Zodiac Killer hoax theory, and it was responding perhaps to another documentary, The Myth of the Zodiac Killer, but I do confess that I liked the previous cover a little bit more. But there's a different YouTube channel that I would like to respond to right now, and it is Forrest Haggerty's channel. The official name is Forrest Haggerty Channel, and the host, Forrest Haggerty, made a 4-part video series about the Zodiac Killer. The Zodiac was a serial killer that operated in California in 1968 and 69. Whatever happened before or after that is still part of the mystery. And Forrest Haggerty introduced his video series by saying that he was going to divide the Zodiac Killer story into 3 different videos. Ultimately, he ended up making 4. The first one talked about the crimes that were committed by the Zodiac, the second video talked about the letters and the ciphers, and the third one talked about the Zodiac Killer suspect Lawrence Kane, and the fourth one talked about the suspect Arthur Lee Allen. Now, his videos on the letters and the ciphers were actually discussed in both parts 1 and part 2, and that was a little bit repetitive. And to people who are very familiar with the Zodiac Killer mystery, you might think that a lot of the facts that are stated in part 1 are just some things that you can perhaps fast forward through if you want to get to the analyses. And in all seriousness, after watching this video series, I really only had 2 takeaways from his part 1, which is meant to be an introduction. Nothing wrong with his presentation. It's an excellent presentation, actually. It's just, there were 2 takeaways. He had to begin the episode by first making an announcement saying that he was going to insert corrections and new pieces of information into the video. He made the whole thing, and a source that he was primarily using for part 1 was the 2007 documentary This is the Zodiac Speaking, and what he found was that the Zodiac Killer survivor, Mike Mageau, someone who has actually seen the Zodiac Killer and was actually shot by the Zodiac Killer, turned out to be a horribly unreliable witness, and I think that this is just an excellent time to point that out. Now, Mike Mageau was shot on July 4th of 1969 by the Zodiac Killer. The other victim that was with him was Darlene Ferrin. She passed away from her injuries. Mike Mageau would go on to survive. But the problem that Forrest Haggerty experienced is something that people bring up all the time. Mike Mageau went on to become an unreliable witness. He appeared in the documentary saying that he went to a restaurant parking lot with Darlene Ferrin. They were followed by some man who followed them all the way to Blue Rock Springs Park, and then that car drove away, and then that car came back. What Forrest Haggerty had to share in his presentation was that, well, that only seems like it's halfway true. He's going through the police reports again to make parts 2, 3, and 4 of his video series, and he's like, wait a second, these statements from Mike Mageau don't seem to be completely in line with what's in the police reports. This thing about how they went to a restaurant parking lot at 10:30 p.m. and then they were followed all the way to Blue Rock Springs Park, he simply could not find those pieces of information, and ultimately, I do not believe that Darlene Ferrin and Mike Mageau were followed by anyone specifically. I also don't believe Darlene Ferrin went to a restaurant parking lot and she got into an argument with a man who matched the Zodiac Killer's description and was most likely the Zodiac Killer. I think that that stuff is mostly just fiction. Now, why would Mike Mageau want to perpetuate this fictitious narrative? I don't know. But, I mean, people just say a lot of things that don't really quite make a whole lot of sense. The next part of the story that I believe is also fiction is something that Forrest Haggerty also experienced when he made part 1 of his video series, and he's like, now, there's a story from Mike Mageau about how The car follows them to Blue Rock Springs Park, and it's behind them. And Darlene Ferrin makes some comment about how she knows the driver of that car, and his name is Richard or something like that. And she just said the name Richard, and to some effect. And then that same car left, and the same car came back, and that person approached the passenger side door and started shooting at them. Overall, I think that that is also something that just did not happen. Parts of the story are true. Mike and Darlene are sitting in the parked car at Blue Rock Springs Park, and it appears that, I mean, I believe this part of the story, that a car pulled in behind them, and that car was there for a short time, then a car left, and then another car came back. We aren't even 100% sure if it was the same car. I think most likely that it was, but I suppose anything is possible. So then, what Forrest Haggerty was just saying was he couldn't find anything that would support the stuff about how Darlene Ferrin said the name Richard when she was referring to the driver of the car. I also don't think that happened. But I also want to point out, though, that Mike Mageau is not the only person who has gone on to share a bunch of wild stories. I just mentioned the Myth of the Zodiac Killer documentary that came out in 2023, available on Peacock, and it's also aired on the Oxygen channel. And that features an interview with Jim Phillips Crabtree, who was Darlene Ferrin's first husband, and he was also saying things that didn't seem to be 100% accurate, or stuff that was misleading. Firstly, he told a story about how the last time he saw Darlene Ferrin, he said that hell was going to come back to her 9 times over, making himself look suspicious. I have no idea whether he actually said that or not, but one of the more important issues is even the documentary The Myth of the Zodiac Killer wanted to dispute something when Jim Phillips Crabtree referred to himself as a former cryptographer from the Army, and they simply stated that he was a clerical typist and he was stationed in Germany for a few years, that wasn't true. So I also don't think that Jim Phillips Crabtree committed the murder of Darlene Ferrin, and, I mean, Mike Mageau, I don't think he was anyone who was involved with staging the shooting or anything like that. So why would he choose to lie about that? Why would somebody like Jim Phillips Crabtree choose to lie about that when he's been silent on the Zodiac Killer mystery for so long? I simply do not know. And if you want to weigh in the comment section, you can put your ideas down below. What do you think is up with people telling fishy stories or wild stories that don't seem to be 100% true? What do people have to gain from it? And the only thing that I could lean toward is that they are just getting off on misleading people because that just means that they know the truth and other people don't, or they're telling a story that they think that people would want to hear as opposed to what actually happened. But I don't believe Mike Mageau, and I don't believe Jim Phillips Crabtree. And if you want to share things, you can put them in the comments section. And as I said, though, there were 2 takeaways from the first part of Forrest Haggerty's series. The first was that Mike Mageau was an unreliable witness, and there was another observation that was made by Forrest Haggerty, not about the Blue Rock Springs shooting, but also about the Lake Berryessa stabbing, the third crime in Zodiac activity, which saw the death of Cecilia Shepard and the stabbing of Brian Hartnell. And he just pointed out that Brian Hartnell was stabbed 6 times in the back, and Cecilia Shepard was stabbed 10 times, and he did not think there was anything weird about that. A lot of people look into the story, and they think that it's because the Zodiac Killer hated women, or that he was trying to hurt the female victim more intensely, but he pointed out that Cecilia Shepard was thrashing about, and the Zodiac stabbed her 5 times in the back, and then she turns over, so then he began to stab her in the front more times, and that's, I mean, 6 times versus 10 times. No matter what people say about the Zodiac Killer, I don't think that he completely lost control on Cecilia Shepard. Maybe adrenaline had kicked in a little bit, but overall, I think that he was trying to subdue her because she turned over, and Forrest Haggerty ultimately had a similar response. In the second video, he had shared a lot of information that had been covered in part 1. However, I think that the most valuable point that was my takeaway from part 2 of Forrest Haggerty's Zodiac series wasn't even mentioned in the video. It's very simply just that he was putting the Zodiac Killer letters on the screen. And one of them is the Melvin Belli letter. And the Melvin Belli letter has very different handwriting from the early Zodiac correspondences. But he also brought up other pieces of Zodiac writing, such as the Dragon card. And I've talked about the Phillips 66 map for a long time. And I think when all of these things are put in order, it shows that there was one person who wrote this. And I also think on the Melvin Belli letter, the Dragon card, and the Phillips 66 map, the Zodiac was trying to be extremely neat. And when he was writing the early letters, I guess we can call it the first letter, and then the debut of the Zodiac letter that says this is the Zodiac speaking, and the letter after the Stein murder, I think that he was trying to be intentionally sloppy. And I think in a lot of Zodiac communications, the killer was trying to be intentionally sloppy with his handwriting. But it just shows that this was all one person who was writing those things. Now, I've talked a lot about Arthur Lee Allen on some of the previous Zodiac Killer News reports, so I would like to focus on the part 3 of Forrest Haggerty's video series, and he tells the story of the Zodiac suspect Lawrence Kane. And I don't know if Lawrence Kane is the top suspect of Forrest Haggerty, but the way that he shared the narrative, I mean, just putting all of these pieces of info in line, yeah, it made it sound like Lawrence Kane was the Zodiac killer, or more importantly, it made it sound like Lawrence Kane was the person who abducted and murdered Donna Lass on September 6th of 1970, because Lawrence Kane's biggest connection to the Zodiac Killer mystery, I personally believe, is that he worked in the Sahara Tahoe Hotel and Casino, and sometimes he's referred to as a real estate agent. Forrest Haggerty was referring to him as somebody who sold timeshares, but that, of course, would be a variant of real estate. And he's saying that, I mean, there are all these stories about people that either match Lawrence Kane's description or that sounds like it could just straight up be Lawrence Kane that are going on in the Northern California and Nevada areas. And it seems like Forrest Haggerty is of the belief that Lawrence Kane committed the 1974 murder of Dana Lowe. But there is another suspicious incident that I haven't talked about on Black Box Online Radio before, and I'm not even sure exactly the source that Forrest Haggerty was using for his video series, but it's quite possible that he was reading from ZodiacKillerIdentified.com, and there is an incident of a woman who met a man at a Shakey's Pizza Parlor in California who began talking about the Zodiac, and I would like to go over to ZodiacKillerIdentified.com. And this is the version of a police report from South Lake Tahoe, and this is when someone recounted an encounter at a Shakey's Pizza Parlor. Firstly, as a lot of you know, I spend some time in the Philippines almost every year now, and Shakey's is very popular there. They have some locations in the United States, but Shakey's is everywhere in the Philippines. They have wonderful crispy pizzas. You got to get the thin crust with them, but I digress. A man of identical description to Lawrence Kane sat down next to a woman whose name does not appear in the report and began talking about the signs of the Zodiac. He said he lived in a nearby studio apartment and sold real estate out of state. He said that he had been watching a woman at work and she would be sorry for rejecting him. Numerous times he repeated that the woman would be sorry. He indicated that the woman's and his Zodiac signs were compatible. This was not the case. He insisted with the woman's present boyfriend. The woman at the pizza parlor made up an excuse to leave and hurried from the restaurant feeling unnerved. The encounter, she stated in the report, took place between July and September of 1970. Once again, Donna Lass went missing on September 6th of 1970. Her skeletal remains were found in 1986, and they were identified in December of 2023. After reading these reports, Harvey Hines, the man who brought Lawrence Kane forward as a Zodiac killer suspect, went to the South Lake Tahoe Police Department in 1974 to find out what progress they had made in the Donna Lass case. He was amazed to learn that they had done nothing since the preliminary investigation 3 years earlier. They neither sent anyone to check out the Sierra Club Lodge, nor did they question Kent Williams, the manager of the lodge. Harvey Hines went to the Sahara Tahoe Hotel and Casino and noted that Donna Lass had a logbook, and she had an unfinished entry at 1:50 a.m. The last person she saw before departing into oblivion on the night of her disappearance was Joan Bentley and her husband from San Francisco, and that was at 1:40 a.m., and she appeared to be in good spirits. And this is just where the Donna Lass mystery takes a very sharp turn, because it's like, well, what actually happened? I mean, was she abducted? Did she leave on her own accord? Did she have plans with somebody and did she leave early? Was she simply lured somewhere by Lawrence Kane? And again, when you read all these things about how there's this guy saying that he sells real estate out of state, and Lawrence Kane sells real estate in Nevada, and he's talking about the Zodiac signs, talking about having a connection to Donna Lass, and Lawrence Kane did work at the Sahara Tahoe Hotel and Casino, and Donna Lass works at the Sahara Tahoe Hotel and Casino. I mean, this is stuff that sounds very damning, but it's all circumstantial, and it's definitely not hard evidence. But what do you think? Do you think Lawrence Kane committed the abduction and murder of Donna Lass? And I would like to thank Forrest Haggerty for his 4-part video series, which you can find on the Forrest Haggerty channel. Now, a lot of you guys know that I follow the Citizen Detective podcast, which is available on YouTube, and you can get it on other platforms, I believe, but I watch all the episodes on YouTube. And I went through their 2-part episode on Bible John. Bible John is sometimes referred to as Scotland's Jack the Ripper, although Jack the Ripper appears to be way more vicious than Bible John. Bible John murdered at least 3 women, and he gets that name because he was reported to have quoted Bible verses to people on the nights of the murders. But I don't necessarily want to focus on that story so much. I would actually like to look at some of their analyses and relate them to that of the Zodiac Killer. Because one of the co-hosts of the Citizen Detective podcast is Dr. Lee Meller, and he talked about using the Big 5 personality traits to assess serial killers. Dr. Lee Meller is a real criminologist, and he's pretty good at conducting these types of assessments. I mean, he's a professional, and I want to be fully clear. I am not a professional in any way. I am not a psychologist. I am not a criminologist. I am just somebody who reads books and watches YouTube videos and listens to podcasts like anybody else. So I heard his assessment of Bible John using the Big 5 personality traits, represented by the acronym OCEAN: openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. And I would like to do that for the Zodiac Killer now, again, in my own amateurish, unprofessional opinion and take on the subject. Firstly, Dr. Lee Meller recommended that when assessing a serial killer and using openness, the first thing you'd have to look at is, are they just interested in different types of art forms? Would this be somebody who's interested in different types of things like literature and such, different types of creative passions? With the Zodiac Killer, absolutely. Not 100%, 110%. The Zodiac Killer would be extremely high in trait openness. The Zodiac letters are filled with references to various forms of literature, The Most Dangerous Game, The Mikado from Gilbert and Sullivan, possibly even T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland. Some people even think the Bible could also be incorporated into the Zodiac's creations, The Secret Agent by Joseph Conrad. The list just goes on and on and on about the possible influences on the creation of the Zodiac Killer persona. But the first 2 that I stated are thought to be a little bit more widely accepted. The Most Dangerous Game, The Mikado from Gilbert and Sullivan, where there are direct references, the Tim Holt comics, Red Rider comics, which could actually be a Red Rider coloring book even. So there are elements from music, opera, books and stories, comic books, all types of things are incorporated into the Zodiac Killer persona. The Zodiac is high in trait openness, and strangely, I don't know about strangely, Dr. Lee Miller would made the assessment of Bible John, and he said that Bible John would be a serial killer who had an extremely low level of trait openness, just pointing out that you're going to get all types of personalities up and down and all across the spectrum when analyzing these types of behaviors. And it's not going to be like all serial killers are low in trait openness, but I will come back to that one later on. Openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. Now, with conscientiousness, the way that Dr. Lee Meller recommended looking at this one in terms of analyzing a serial killer would be, how orderly is their life? How structured is their life? How schedule and detail-oriented are they? And believe it or not, I actually think that the Zodiac Killer would be very low in schedule and detail-oriented activities. Some people believe that the Zodiac was a 9-to-5 worker because he committed his crimes on holidays and weekends, and those were the times when he could get away, but the Zodiac just does not seem to follow any specific pattern. He's committing crimes on December 20th of 1968 with the Lake Herman Road murders, July 4th, 1969 with the Blue Rock Springs shooting, September 27th, 1969 with the Lake Berryessa stabbing, October 11th, 1969 with the Stein murder, and who knows about the unconfirmed events. And we also have the mailings of the letters and the ciphers, and it doesn't appear that there is a clear pattern. And just because somebody is working a 9 to 5 job, it doesn't mean that they're an executive or a businessman. He could have also been a custodian who's working in the same building as the executives and the businessmen. I'm not saying that he truly was, that's just a possibility. But I don't see anything that would indicate that the Zodiac is extremely organized and extremely detail perfected, or that he is following schedules, or that he has a very structured life when it comes to anything, because not only is he mailing the letters, not only is he mailing ciphers, he's also mailing greeting cards, and there doesn't seem to be a strong pattern. However, in terms of precision and detail-oriented work, to give credit where credit is due, the Zodiac does create some very, very neatly designed ciphers, and as I said, he had the ability to write very neatly with the Melvin Belli letter, the Dragon card, the Phillips 66 map, and so on. But I don't think that's conscientiousness. I think that that's just a brief moment of focus, as opposed to being conscientious and schedule and structure oriented. The next one is extroversion. Would the Zodiac Killer have been an extrovert or an introvert? I don't think he was extroverted. I think that he would have been introverted. I think he he would have been able to fake extroversion. I mean, he could perhaps sometimes put on a friendly facade and pretend to be outgoing, but I think that somebody like the Zodiac Killer would have been an introvert, spent a lot of time alone, and internalized his rage, as opposed to having lots of people whom he could talk to in a healthy and creative way. I mean, I think that that's a fair thing to say. And I also think that that would be something that would be present with a lot of serial killers. Then we have agreeableness, and this is the one that is most likely going to be the same for a lot of serial killers. I said personalities are going to be different, but most serial killers are extremely low in agreeableness, but they pretend like they are not. Agreeableness means you agree to go along with things, and it also means that people who are agreeable are pair bonding. Like, agreeableness is a pair bonding trait. They prefer one-on-one interactions. Agreeableness is also a peacemaking characteristic. I have a whole episode on this one of the old black box recordings, because I'm extremely high in trait agreeableness. Now, there can be a lot of problems associated with that. It's not all sunshine and rainbows. In fact, there is actually quite a lot of trouble being high in trait agreeableness, which I talked about in the older episode. But overall, I think the Zodiac would have been extremely low in agreeableness, but he would have fooled a lot of people in his personal life by making them think that he was agreeable. Dr. Lee Miller also pointed out in the Big Five personality trait model, the Zodiac, or I guess you could apply it to any serial killer, actually, anyone you're evaluating with the Big Five personality traits. With the Big Five personality trait model, they include honesty as a subfacet of agreeableness, and he's just saying honesty should not be an agreeable characteristic, and I completely agree with that. But the reason he provided was that sometimes agreeable people are going to be dishonest so that they can be agreeable. And a lot of what I learned about the Big Five personality traits came from Dr. Jordan Peterson, and he has done numerous lectures on this. And he just talks about how agreeable people want things light and airy. Agreeable people want to smooth the waters in situations, the kind of people that would avoid conflicts. Or, well, let's just stay with that. Light and airy, smooth-watered, trying to avoid conflicts. Someone is going to be dishonest for the sake of those reasons. They're going to be dishonest for the sake of peacekeeping, as opposed to being honest and allowing all hell to break loose. So I completely agree that agreeableness and honesty are not the same thing. And Dr. Lee Miller said there's another model out there called Hexaco that uses honesty in a different way, and perhaps I can do a further explanation on that in the future. But the last one would be neuroticism. Was the Zodiac Killer high in trait neuroticism? And I'm going to say he was very low in neuroticism, but it's not my own original observation. It comes to us from Dr. Todd Grande, who also looked at the Zodiac killer's behavior, and he did a video analyzing the Zodiac's personality, and he thought the Zodiac was extremely low in neuroticism because what you do when you analyze serial killer personality traits and behaviors is not only what was this person like in their daily life based on my own ability to postulate and hypothesize, but also how did they commit the crimes. And what Dr. Todd Grande pointed out was the Zodiac was shooting the victims and leaving, and he leaves the bodies there. A serial killer who would be very high in neuroticism would be one who is going to bury the bodies of the victims, destroy all the evidence, wipe down everything, and then just there's not going to be a single fiber that is going to be left behind, because neuroticism is heavily connected to worrying, heavily connected to repetitive thinking, and there are other aspects of neuroticism, but those are ones that were discussed by Dr. Todd Grande. And the Zodiac doesn't do any of that with the first three crimes. He leaves the victims there, he leaves evidence there, he left shell casings behind at Lake Herman Road. Now, the cab after the Stein murder was wiped down, but that is perhaps even by the Zodiac's own admission, just to leave false clues or something to that effect. I don't want to misstate something, but that's the overall idea. The Zodiac was rather low in neuroticism. So, to recap, high in trade openness, absolutely. Conscientiousness, low in conscientiousness. Extroversion, I think he would have been low in extroversion, maybe average, but low in extroversion. Agreeableness, extremely low, but pretended like he was high. And neuroticism, he would have been very low. So he's open to new experiences, not very structured, and he doesn't care about how people feel, and he's not worried about it. The makings of a serial killer. You can see how these personality trait models are used to organize and structure things, and they're also done to help us understand human behavior. And once again, I would like to refer everybody to the Citizen Detective podcast, where I heard a lot of these discussions, and I enjoyed the Bible John episode. It was one of the fastest moving ones, especially part 2. I thought like 5 minutes had gone by, and I hit pause on the video, and it turned out 30 minutes had just gone by like in a blink. That was a very engaging true crime discussion, so I recommend their 2-part episode on Bible John. And right now, I would just like to remind you guys that there is a lot of true crime content here on Black Box Online Radio, and there is also the channel Astro Psych 400, which is associated with BBO War. And on Astro Psych 400 is where I talk about psychology, once again in my own amateurish perspective and take on the subject. And on that channel, I did a video on persuasion tactics. And I say this in the first part of the video that I was looking at some of the ideas that were shared in the books by Scott Adams, where he talks about persuasion in a world where facts don't matter. The video is about 15 minutes long, but if you go down to the quick reference section, I will include a link to Astro Psych 400, and if you're curious about just about psychology and how people can use persuasion tactics without paying attention to facts at all, I encourage you to watch that video. And if you like listening to Zodiac Monday and some of the other true crime content here on Black Box Online Radio, you can hit the like button and subscribe. It really helps out the channel. And you can also go through some of the links in the description box. And one of them is for buymeacoffee.com. Buymeacoffee.com/blackboxned88 allows you to make a donation or contribution to help support the show, and anybody who makes a donation will get a shout out on Zodiac Monday, and I would like to get to that right now. Firstly, we have one from Batman66. Batman66, thank you so much for your regular and consistent support. And Batman66 has also been helping out a lot with the reels that come out on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and now even TikTok. Yes, I restarted the Black Box Online Radio TikTok page. I used it earlier this year, but I stopped using it because, let's just say that TikTok is very weird. But yeah, you can get them as shorts on YouTubes and reels on those other platforms, mostly talking about serial killers, but anything in the true crime world is fair game for the short episodes that come out here on BBO War. And our next one comes to us from River Prawn Pottery. River Prawn Pottery, thank you so much again for your regular and consistent support. You two guys are absolutely amazing. And we have a different one that is not done in terms of a financial contribution, but giving a shout out to Dennis G, who has been helping a lot finding the images for the show, the pictures that you see going by on the screen. Dennis G, thank you so much. And also just a collective shout out to anybody who left super chats on the live streams. Every Tuesday and Thursday for the summer, I'm going live for True Crime Talk Radio in the morning, going live at 10:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, and I'll be there tomorrow as well as on Thursday. Going to try to do every Tuesday and Thursday this summer. Those discussions are mostly focused on forensics, criminology, and of course psychology. As you see, even though I have no formal education in psychology, I just like talking about it. And the reason why is, if I talk about forensics, psychology, and criminology, you guys can respond to any type of true crime case that you want. You can ask any question you want, and we can have any type of discussion that we want. So please tune in for True Crime Talk Radio in the morning. And of course, in addition to Zodiac Monday, there is also Ripper Wednesday on this channel, talking about Jack the Ripper, and Cooper Friday, talking about D.B. Cooper. And at last, I am finally going to talk about the D.B. Cooper Zodiac Killer connection. There are some true crime stories out there that are heavily connected to the Zodiac Killer mystery. Maybe the most famous one is the Zodiac Manson connection. Not only is that the title of a book by Howard Davis, but the Zodiac Manson connection exists because Charles Manson and the Zodiac Killer were both operating in California in the 1960s. Nutshell version, I know. But then we also have the Zodiac Black Dahlia connection. The idea that the Black Dahlia Avenger of the 1940s and the Zodiac Killer from the 1960s were also the same person. But there are three people out there that have very strong claims that D.B. Cooper and the Zodiac Killer were the same person. And one of them is Ray Penrod, and another one is David Gold, author of My Dance with the Zodiac Killer, and thirdly we have Harriet Suchet and her group of followers, people who believe that Jack Torrance was the Zodiac Killer and D.B. Cooper, and as well as committing a host of other crimes. When I said her followers, there's a group of people on the internet that believes that Jack Torrance was a serial killer who committed an enormous amount of crimes. And as we're going to see, he did so because he had connections to either the government or the CIA or some type of CIA-like organization in the theory, in the particular claims. I've been very hesitant to talk about the Zodiac D.B. Cooper connection because, firstly, I'm going to be very honest with you, I don't believe it, and I don't think there's a lot of substance there. But because I started doing Cooper Friday and talking about D.B. Cooper more on this channel, I was contacted by an individual named Darren Schaefer, and he asked me to be a guest on his program, The Cooper Vortex, and I did. And throughout his interview, he mentioned to me that he had interviewed Harriet Suchet and David Gold about their observations involving the Zodiac Killer D.B. Cooper connection, and I thought, I'm going to listen to his interviews, and he does them very well, because he is somebody who is not only keeping an open mind, but giving people a chance to share what they believe and what they think, even if it is the Zodiac D.B. Cooper connection, because I've always said when I do discussions on Black Box Online Radio, if somebody has written a book, if someone has made a video series, or if somebody is even just posting a lot on the internet, and they have shared something about a true crime case, I'll talk about it. And Darren Schaefer seems like he does some similar things. He just openly says that he'll talk about anyone's true crime observations. And I would like to begin with Harriet Suchet, but I have to say, though, this is not going to be going in a very positive direction. Once again, no, nothing wrong with Darren Schaefer. She has written a book called The World According to Jack Torrance, and she was a guest on his program, and he was discussing her findings. But firstly, I still can't believe this. When I was listening to the Cooper Vortex, she's on there and she says that her Zodiac Killer D.B. Cooper suspect Jack Torrance committed the D.B. Cooper skyjacking on November 24th of 1971, getting on a plane with a dud bomb. She believes the bomb was a dud, and that D.B. Cooper demanded $200,000 in ransom money. You guys know that, and he parachuted into the night. Well, not according to Harriet Suchet. She believes that Jack Torrance, using the name Dan Cooper, and Jack Torrance hid in a secret compartment in the plane, and he jumped out with a fishing line. And I heard this on the Cooper Vortex, and I think even the host, Darren, was quite surprised. What do you mean he jumped out of the plane with a fishing line? What's the deal with hiding in a secret compartment? And I began to try and think about this in my own mind, and I was like, oh, well, she must mean that he was carrying a fishing line, and he used that to secure the bag of money and to secure the briefcase with what appeared to be a bomb, like to secure all that to his apparatus while he was going to jump out of the plane over Oregon or Washington State, right? Right? No. That D.B. Cooper did not even jump and open a parachute. He jumped out of a plane with the stuff tied around him using a fishing line, and he didn't jump over Oregon or Washington State. D.B. Cooper requested that the plane fly to first Mexico City, and when they realized that that was impossible because there wasn't the plane couldn't hold enough fuel to fly to Mexico City, they agreed on Reno, Nevada. And she more or less states that this was all done by design, and then Jack Torrance, under the name of Dan Cooper, got into the secret compartment, tied everything together, and then he jumped out of the plane over in Reno, Nevada, because the staircase could have been going down at a time when other people wouldn't have been looking, maybe they never even pulled it back up, and he jumped out of the plane at a low altitude over Reno, Nevada, and he was somewhat injured in the fall. And I was just like, am I hearing this right? And I think even the host Aaron did a double take. Wait, what do you mean? But that's just some type of far out wild idea. I'm going to share something with you guys now, and this is something that's a little bit more serious. And all I'm going to say is, I'm going to play a clip of Harriet Suchet's interview with Darren Schaefer on the Cooper Vortex, and I will have a response to it, because she's going to be talking about how she believes D.B. Cooper, Jack Torrance, planned the Zodiac murders, about what he was doing, and the introductory material that I would like to share is mostly just going to be that this was something that was done on behalf of some type of CIA-like, MK Ultra-like operation. Okay, let's have a listen.
Anyways, that was a very surprising standout for me. So I don't want to get too sidetracked because we're definitely focusing on D.B. Cooper. But again, in order to understand D.B. Cooper, you got to understand all these other mysteries. And Jack
especially if one dude did it all.
Well, he didn't do it by himself. That's the thing that I'm finding out, that he's working with some amazing people. And I definitely can sense he had a love-hate relationship with Nixon. And and I understand that Jack was pretty much a lifelong Democrat and Nixon's a Republican, but he's ending up working for the Nixon administration starting around 1968. So it looks like he's just trying to clean up the past and trying to get after those who killed Bobby Kennedy. I'm sure Nixon hated the Kennedys. We heard that all the time, but didn't really want them dead. And then now he's the president. He's like, I got to get after these people that killed all these other people before me because I'm now the president and they can kill me. So I think that that's why he's working, and who he's working for. By 1968, he's working for the administration. Nixon, Spiro Agnew. Who knew?
Did Jack Torrance ever work with E. Howard Hunt?
E. Howard Hunt. You're bringing up something. I went to two of the JFK conferences, and I tried to ask questions to his son. And his son just kind of looked at me like, I can't answer things like that. I met people who worked for the CIA at those conferences. Tosh Plumlee. And I asked him, I just asked him out right, because Tosh Plumlee is very familiar with Texas. Jack is from Texas. And I asked him, did you know Jack Torrance? Because Dennis was telling me at that time period when he was still, because Dennis is now deceased, but Dennis was telling me about that time period that when Jack died, some kind of like CIA-esque people came to pay their respects and fired off a 6 or 7 gun salute. So anyways, I'm asking even Tosh Plumlee, did you ever work with him or know him? And he says, Harriet, I can't answer that question. He smiled like, yes, I did, but I can't say yes or no.
Interesting.
So E. Howard Hunt is definitely placed there with the Nixon administration. So I would not be surprised if he knew him.
Because I knew someone else who theorized E. Howard Hunt could have been D.B. Cooper.
Well, he was definitely, if I'm seeing this for what it is, and a lot of decodes that are now saying cryptic messages that were sent to the Chronicle, and all that same time period. that the break-in for Watergate was staged. So that was, again, if you want to call it MK Ultra-esque, make people think it was something that was, there were other really things going on. I would think that he definitely knew E. Howard Hunt, because it's all cloak and dagger and things that had to be cleaned up, how the president got into the White House. Can't have it being thoroughly talked about that Bugsy Siegel and all these people helped him get in there. That was not good politics then. But but Jack is definitely knowing a lot, and wow, yeah. So again, I think he did know him.
What has the reaction been to your book, The World According to Jack Torrance?
That once people read it, especially people that are familiar with this area, they're like, "Oh my God, so and so I knew was a witness that saw the car, and they tried to go to the police, and the police just brushed them off." Now that they see it, that Darlene Ferrin was supposed to die, it makes sense. It was, there were people that have claimed that they were witnesses and tried to come forward in this region, in the wine country region, and when they're seeing this, they say, "Well, now it makes sense." And Brian Hartnell was not a very good guy at the time. Jack's got a few things to say about him, why he went after Cecilia Shepard and why he was wearing the hood. But once you put it into perspective that they were involved with people who were either assassins or would-be assassins, that's who they were going after, makes a lot more sense. And I think that's what people are surprised about, especially when they see, "Oh my God, it was an anagram."
And once again, that was Harriet Suchet on the Cooper Vortex. She is the author of The World According to Jack Torrance, believing that the Zodiac Killer and D.B. Cooper were the same person, Jack Torrance. And sometimes you have to play the card of, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. Other times you have to play the card of just calling someone out on their BS. And that's what I would do ultimately here. Did you hear everything in that 5-minute clip? Firstly, stating that Jack Torrance is part of some type of serial killer-like operation involved in some type of mind control program, and those people are amazing. And then you have the same person saying that Darlene Ferrin was meant to die. Brian Hartnell, the surviving victim of Lake Berryessa, was a bad person. You're saying that the killer and imaginary killers in your own mind are good people and the victims are bad people. That's disgusting. And almost certainly untrue. Again, sometimes you say, if you don't have anything nice to say, you don't say anything at all. Other times you just need to tell somebody that that's ridiculous. And I have nothing further to discuss about her observations on Jack Torrance, except for one point. And this has nothing to do with any of the D.B. Cooper connection. In her interview with Darren Schaefer, Harriet Suchet stated that when someone is proposing a Zodiac killer suspect, they have to solve the ciphers for there to be confirmation that this was the Zodiac killer. And I absolutely disagree with that. The Zodiac killer created multiple ciphers, the Z408, the Z340, the Z13, which is the My Name Is cipher, and then the Z32, which is about the location of a bomb. I disagree completely. If there was some way somehow people were able to get a DNA match to a suspect, partial fingerprint matches, or maybe whole fingerprint matches, a palm print match, writer's palm, something to that effect, and they couldn't solve the ciphers, they couldn't solve the Z32 and the Z13, I wouldn't say anything about it. I wouldn't be like, no, I think that the forensic evidence is in favor of this person being the Zodiac killer, and even if we don't know the answers to the cipher solutions, it doesn't mean that they weren't the Zodiac killer. You do not need those types of answers to identify a Zodiac killer suspect. Now that's just my take on the subject. I said that there was another interview that I listened to on the Cooper Vortex with Dr. David Gold. I mean, his name is Dr. David Kuchar, using the pseudonym David Gold. That's what he was called when he was a pro wrestler. And he has a book out called My Dance with the Zodiac Killer. And his Zodiac Killer D.B. Cooper suspect is Frank Lee Morris, although he states that there were at least 3 people who were involved with the Zodiac murders: Frank Morris and John and Clarence Anglin. They're the 3 men who committed the escape from Alcatraz. And I just want to point out that this is perhaps the biggest Zodiac killer theory out there. I mean, excuse me for saying that. David Gold is very precise. These are not theories. These are things that he remembers because he claims he knew Frank Morris and John and Clarence Anglin personally. And he states that that these 3 individuals murdered over 20,000 people. He says that they were just killing 1 person a day for years, and they were also involved with other things like causing a bridge collapse in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, which could have killed dozens, if not hundreds, of people. So 1 person a day on average, maybe, but some events killed many, many people. And this is perhaps the biggest and most intricate Zodiac killer set of observations, because people like Ann Penn state that her suspect, Joseph D'Angelo, committed 200 murders. Then you have John Cameron stating that his suspect, Edward Wayne Edwards, committed 660 murders. Now David Gold says over 20,000. And again, I'm going to be very honest with you. I don't think that any of this is true. And someone has pointed out that David Gold would often follow the news about the Zodiac Killer mystery and then say all of a sudden, oh yeah, I remember Frank Lee Morris told me about that, and this is what happened, and this is the story. Whatever's going on with him, I can't necessarily comment on that. But because I've been following the D.B. Cooper case, I also found a video where Darren Schaefer was interviewing Ross Richardson, and I've read Ross Richardson's book, Still Missing, Rethinking the D.B. Cooper Case. And he was talking about how people make theories in true crime cases, and this isn't connected to any specific or single suspect. And what he has said is that it's almost like taking a bow and arrow and shooting the arrow at the broad side of a barn, and then you can draw your own target around it. You can walk to that arrow on the barn and just start painting red circles in the shape of a target around it, because that's what people are doing. And they're choosing a suspect for whatever reason Harriet Suchet or David Gold has for stating this, or even some of the other people out there like Harvey Hines who was talking about Lawrence Kane, and they are just finding reasons about how and why this person is the Zodiac Killer, or this person is D.B. Cooper, and they're not necessarily using the strongest pieces of evidence, they're just only using the evidence that is necessary and relevant to make their suspect fit. So I just think there's a lot of that going on with the Zodiac Killer D.B. Cooper connection. I don't believe it for a second, taking a strong stance on this one. But what do you guys think? You can put your ideas in the comment section down below. Do you have any responses to the statements that I made about Forrest Haggerty's Zodiac Killer channel? Do you have any responses to the statements that I made about the psychological assessment of the Zodiac Killer? And no matter what, though, I recommend the Cooper Vortex. It's my new favorite show. I think that it's extremely engaging. It's done in the podcast tradition where there's just a single image on the screen, and it's done almost like old-fashioned radio, like an old-fashioned interview style, but it's so engaging. I am so focused when I listen to the Cooper Vortex, and lots of credit to Darren and all the work that he does over there. But I invite you guys to check out some other content here on Black Box Online Radio one more time. Every Friday I talk about D.B. Cooper as well. We also have Ripper Wednesday talking about Jack the Ripper, and going live Tuesday and Thursday for True Crime Talk Radio in the morning. And that will be all for me now. Anybody can write the show at blackboxonlineradio@aol.com. You can also get me on Facebook. My personal Facebook is in the description box. And there was always BlackBoxNid88 over on Instagram. And I will see you over there. Goodbye.